The air beneath the old farmhouse was heavy with dampness and the sour scent of mold. The space had no windows large enough to bring in real light, only a flickering bulb that hummed faintly, swaying on its cord like a weary pendulum. The walls were unfinished concrete, cold and clammy to the touch, and the ceiling was low enough that even the smallest among them sometimes ducked unconsciously as they moved. The basement was not a home, though it had been forced to serve as one. It was a stage, a prison, and a reminder that the world above no longer belonged to them. 5 figures occupied the narrow space. They did not speak. Words they had learned could be dangerous here. Instead, they breathed in unison, shallow and careful like a fragile chorus holding its final note. In the farthest corner, a girl sat with her knees drawn tightly to her chest. Her hair, once golden, was now tangled and dull, and her small hands clutched a frayed stuffed rabbit so tightly the seams had begun to split. Emma Carter, 9 years old, had not cried in days. Crying had consequences. Beside her, Clara Mitchell sat rigidly back straight as though by some act of will she could remain unbroken. Once she had been a teacher, her days filled with chalk dust and laughter. Those memories had dulled, now softened into something unreal, like a dream she had half forgotten. Her gaze often drifted to Emma, protective but helpless. Clara had learned that showing fear only made him smile. On the opposite side of the room, Thomas Brooks rested against the wall, his breathing shallow, a rasp scraping his throat. He was a tall man, shoulders slumped from months of captivity. The passage of time had lost all meaning here. Each day blurred into the next, marked only by rituals imposed by their captor. Ryan Turner, barely 14, sat cross-legged. His eyes hollow. The boy spoke to no one, his lips moving in silent patterns as though he were reciting something to himself, clinging to fragments of the life he'd once known. Near him, Evelyn Harper knelt on a thin mattress whispering prayers no one else could hear. At 72, Evelyn's hands trembled constantly. Yet she alone seemed to find some fragile thread of strength in those whispered words. They all wore matching navy blue sweaters. The fabric was scratchy and ill-fitting, but the sameness was intentional. It stripped them of individuality, turned them into pieces of a picture that only he could arrange. Above them, the house groaned with the weight of winter. Wind pressed against the boards, and from somewhere distant came the mournful cry of a train passing through the darkness. That sound had become their clock. Clara counted the trains when sleep refused to come, marking the hours, not in minutes, but in the long, echoing wails that rolled across the fields. The silence broke with a sound they all dreaded, heavy, deliberate footsteps descending the wooden stairs. Each step seemed to carry the weight of judgment. Emma froze, her small fingers gripping the stuffed rabbit until her knuckles turned white. Clara inhaled sharply, holding the breath inside her chest. Even Evelyn's prayers fell silent. The metal door at the top of the stairs creaked open. A blade of yellow light cut across the room, sharp and blinding after so much darkness. His shadow stretched before him, tall and distorted, a dark herald announcing his presence. And then he appeared. He moved with the calm assurance of someone who believed himself to be a savior. His sweater matched theirs, the same navy blue, though his was immaculate, freshly laundered. His hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. In his hands he carried a camera, the old kind that clicked and flashed and produced a photograph you could hold in your trembling hands moments later. "Good morning, my perfect family," he said, his voice smooth and warm like honey laced with poison. No one answered. They had learned long ago that silence was safest unless he asked for a response. He scanned their faces, eyes lingering on each of them, his expression unreadable. Then, with a small nod, he gestured for them to rise. "Places," he murmured. The 5 captives obeyed. Slowly, painfully, they arranged themselves in the order he required: grandmother, father, mother, son, daughter. Always that order. Always the same. Clara took Emma's hand as they moved into position, her fingers trembling but steady enough to guide the child. He adjusted the camera lens, humming a cheerful tune that clashed horribly with the tension in the room. The humming was worse than shouting. It meant he was pleased, and when he was pleased, things were often worse later. Emma stared straight ahead. She could feel Clara's hand squeezing hers, a silent plea to remain still. She had learned to smile on command, though the muscles of her face protested the unnatural stretch. The flash ignited searing white light into their vision. For an instant, the world disappeared, replaced by the frozen image he wanted them to become. When their sight returned, he was smiling. Truly, smiling as he shook the photograph and held it up to inspect. "Beautiful," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." He pinned the new picture to the wall beside dozens of others. Each photograph was nearly identical. 5 figures, 5 hollow smiles, a perfect family that never changed except for the subtle differences only he would notice. As the light flickered and the basement sank back into darkness, Clara felt a tear slide down her cheek. She kept her head high, refusing to wipe it away. Above them, the wind howled and the train screamed again in the distance. The world continued to move, indifferent to the nightmare below. For those listening to this story, don't forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Stay with us as the darkness unfolds. The captives stood frozen in place long after he had gone, the echo of the flash still burning in their eyes. Somewhere in the shadows, Emma's stuffed rabbit slipped from her grasp and landed silently on the cold cement floor. The picture on the wall stared back at them, unchanging, a lie captured in paper and ink. The perfect family, the perfect smile, and far above life went on blissfully unaware of what lived beneath. The night was black ice and frozen breath, a silence so deep it felt almost sacred. A pale moon hung low over the endless fields of corn, their stalks brittle and dead, rattling softly in the winter wind. The farmhouse sat at the center of it all like a relic no one wanted to claim. Its shutters were painted a faded blue, its roof bowed under the weight of snow, its windows dark and blind. Far below, in the suffocating depths of the basement, Clara Mitchell lay on her thin mattress, eyes wide open. Sleep had long since abandoned her, replaced by a single, relentless thought: escape. She had whispered that word to herself in the dead of night, tracing its shape with her lips as if naming it could make it real. Tonight, something was different. She had felt it in the rhythm of his footsteps, in the way he lingered a beat too long at the doorway before ascending the stairs. Papa had left the metal lock slightly ajar. It was a mistake so small, so inconceivable that Clara almost convinced herself she had imagined it. But when the others drifted into drugged, shallow sleep, Clara dared to move. She slid her legs from beneath the rough woolen blanket and felt the icy floor beneath her feet. The cold stabbed up through her bones, but she bit her lip and kept going. Each step was deliberate, a prayer in motion. Emma stirred in her sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Clara froze breath, caught in her throat. For a heartbeat, she considered taking the girl with her, but one glance at the heavy lock and the narrow passage beyond told her it would be impossible. Carrying Emma would mean noise delay failure. If Clara fell, no one would ever know the truth. She bent low, brushing her lips against Emma's tangled hair, a silent promise. Then Clara turned away and slipped through the half-open door. The farmhouse above was a maze of shadows. The smell of burnt sugar lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid tang of disinfectant. Photographs covered the walls, hundreds of them each a fragment of the same nightmare. The perfect family, smiling forever. Clara forced herself not to look. If she looked, she would scream, and screaming would bring him back. The front door groaned when she touched it. She paused, waiting for the sound of boots on the stairs, for the calm, measured voice to cut through the darkness and undo her fragile courage. Nothing came. Just the wind outside keening like a ghost. Clara slipped out into the snow. The cold struck her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, making her gasp in silence. She stumbled across the yard, her bare feet slicing open on hidden shards of ice. Somewhere far away, a train wailed the sound, carrying across the barren landscape like a beacon. She fixed her eyes on that sound and ran. Minutes blurred into eternity. Clara no longer felt her body, only the burning in her lungs and the pounding of her heart. The highway appeared at last, a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the white emptiness. Lights shimmered in the distance. A massive truck rumbled past its headlights, searing the darkness. Clara staggered into the road, waving her arms with what little strength remained. The truck screeched to a halt, its horn blaring. The driver, a heavy-set man named George Miller, leapt down, his breath fogging in the bitter air. To him, Clara must have seemed a vision from some half-remembered nightmare. A barefoot woman in a tattered blue dress, eyes wild and vacant. She collapsed at his feet, whispering words that barely reached his ears. "Mama has to be back for dinner." George wrapped his coat around her trembling body and called for help, his voice shaking. In that moment, Clara's world dissolved into sirens and spinning red lights. She did not see the farmhouse shrinking behind her, growing smaller and smaller in the distance until it was only a dark speck on a white horizon. She did not hear the door slam shut, the lock clicking into place, or the quiet, measured footsteps descending the stairs once more. Below, in the cold belly of the earth, Emma awoke to find Clara gone. She did not cry. Instead, she clutched her rabbit to her chest and stared at the door. Somewhere in the darkness, Papa smiled. For those listening, don't forget to follow and subscribe. This is only the beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Far above, in a hospital Clara had never seen, a detective would soon be called, and the first threads of a story far greater than anyone imagined would begin to unravel. But for now, there was only the cold and the faint hope that freedom was more than a dream. The hospital stood like a pale monolith at the edge of the sleeping town, its windows glowing faintly against the early morning dark. Inside, the hallway smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, an unwelcoming blend that spoke of long nights and lingering worry. It was here that Detective Olivia Hayes walked with measured steps, her boots silent against the polished floor. She had been called out of bed at 4 a.m, her phone buzzing insistently beside her head. The voice on the other end had been urgent, clipped survivor found, female mid-30s, possible connection to the disappearances. That was all Olivia needed to hear. As she moved past the rows of closed doors, her reflection appeared in the darkened windows. Her dark hair was tied back, her face pale and drawn. She had been a detective for nearly 15 years, and in that time she had seen things that left deep marks, the kind that never faded. But this call was different. It had stirred something in her chest, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge in years. 5 years earlier, Olivia's own daughter had vanished without a trace. A single moment of inattention at a crowded fairground, and the child she had loved more than life itself was simply gone. The case went cold within months. The absence had hollowed Olivia out, leaving only the shell of a woman who threw herself into work because it was easier than sitting still with the grief. The case she was walking into now threatened to rip open wounds that had never truly healed. At the far end of the corridor, a uniformed officer waited beside a closed door. His face was grim as he gave a brief nod. "Detective Hayes," he said softly. "She's inside, still disoriented. Be careful, she panics easily." Olivia nodded, bracing herself. When she pushed the door open, the first thing she noticed was the smell disinfectant mixed with something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp near the bed. Clara Mitchell lay propped against the pillows, a thin blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, darting between shadows as if expecting them to move. She had the fragile, tremulous look of someone who had been held too tightly by fear for too long. A nurse hovered near the corner, murmuring soft reassurances. Clara did not respond. She seemed to exist in a world beyond the reach of ordinary words. Olivia's heart clenched as she stepped closer. There was something about Clara's face, the haunted stillness, the way her lips trembled without sound, that reminded Olivia of the photographs of her daughter's last birthday. The nurse quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. Olivia knelt beside the bed, speaking softly but firmly. She did not ask questions right away. Instead, she simply let her presence be felt, a steadying anchor in the storm of Clara's fractured mind. Minutes passed before Clara's gaze finally locked on Olivia's. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. He called himself Papa. The words seemed to scrape her throat raw like they had been buried deep and were clawing their way out. Olivia leaned forward, every muscle tense. Clara continued in fragments, her sentences broken like shattered glass. 5 of us. Always 5. Grandma. Father. Mother. Son. Daughter. Her hands clutched the blanket tighter, knuckles white. If you didn't play your part, you went to reflection time. Shots. Needles. Forgetting. A shiver ran through her thin frame. Olivia's mind raced, connecting the words to the reports she had read over the years, 7 missing persons spread across 3 counties. All different ages, no clear connection. Until now. On the small table beside the bed lay a clear evidence bag. Inside was a single photograph. Olivia reached for it carefully, her gloved fingers brushing the plastic. The image sent a chill down her spine. 5 figures stood in front of a white farmhouse with blue shutters. They wore matching sweaters and identical expression smiles that didn't touch their eyes. The composition was so precise it might have been a staged advertisement, if not for the hollow, lifeless gazes staring out from the paper. On the back, written in neat looping script, were 4 words. My perfect family, day 156. Olivia's breath caught. She turned the photo over again, examining every detail. Behind the group, a large oak tree split into 2 trunks stood like a sentinel. Beyond that, faint but visible, were the blurred lines of a distant railway track. She memorized every feature. These were not random victims. They had been chosen, arranged, molded into something horrific. Clara's voice trembled behind her. There was another girl. Abigail. She didn't smile right. One day, she was gone. Papa said she went back to the world. But she didn't. I know she didn't. Olivia set the photo down carefully. She wanted to ask more, but Clara's breathing had grown shallow, her body sinking back into the pillows. The nurse returned frowning, and Olivia stepped aside as medical monitors began to beep softly. Outside the room, Olivia leaned against the wall, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The pieces of a puzzle were beginning to form, but the image they revealed was monstrous. Somewhere out there in a snowbound farmhouse beneath a dark winter sky, other captives were waiting. Somewhere out there, a man who called himself Papa was preparing for another family day. Olivia straightened her resolve, hardening like ice. This was no longer just another case. It was personal. For those listening, the narrator's voice intoned smooth and haunting. Subscribe now to follow this investigation as it twists through shadows and secrets. The darkness has only begun to unfold. The detective moved down the hall toward the waiting officers, the photograph burning in her mind like a brand. Behind her, Clara drifted into uneasy sleep, her murmured words trailing into silence. And outside, beyond the hospital's warm walls, the wind rose again, carrying with it the faint, distant sound of a train crying through the night. Long before the name Papa was whispered in darkened basements, there was only Simon Grant, a boy whose world shattered in a single night. The house where Simon grew up had once been warm. It smelled of apple pie in autumn, of wood smoke in winter, of laundry hung in the sun. A white house with a picket fence and a swing set in the backyard, the kind of home that looked perfect from the outside. But inside, the walls carried secrets. Raised voices, doors slammed in anger, long silences that stretched like shadows down the hall. On a bitter December evening, when Simon was just 7 years old, the unspoken fractures broke wide open. It began with a sound sharp metallic. A gunshot. Then another. Simon froze in his bedroom, clutching a threadbare teddy bear. His father's voice roared wild and desperate, followed by his mother's scream. Little feet scrambled down the hall, the door to his room bursting open. His younger brother Benjamin, only 5, stood there for a heartbeat before being yanked backward by unseen hands. The scream that followed was cut short. Simon dove into the bedroom closet, pulling the door almost closed. He crouched among shoes and winter coats, trembling so violently the hangers rattled. His heart thudded in his ears, drowning out thought. Through the narrow slit between the door and frame, he saw fragments: his father's boots, his mother's lifeless arms sprawled across the carpet, the rifle lying in a pool of spreading red. Then silence. The kind of silence that is too heavy to breathe in. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time became meaningless in that cramped darkness. Simon didn't cry, he didn't move. He simply stared, unblinking as his mind folded in on itself. When the police finally arrived, alerted by a neighbor who had heard the shots, they found Simon half delirious, dehydrated, clutching the teddy bear so tightly it left marks on his small hands. The official report labeled it a family tragedy. His father had been a man unraveling, plagued by untreated psychosis. The mother, Ruth, and the younger siblings, Benjamin and little Melissa, were buried in a single grave. Simon stood alone at the funeral, a tiny figure lost among dark coats and drifting snowflakes. No relatives came forward to claim him. The system took over then, shuffling him from one foster home to another. 7 homes in 11 years. None lasted long. In some houses he was ignored, left to his own devices, a ghost drifting through rooms. In others he was treated like a burden, a reminder of tragedy people wished they could forget. Smiles never lasted. Promises were always broken. Each time a new family failed him, Simon retreated further into himself, constructing an inner world where families never left and love never faltered. Television became his teacher, his comfort. Old black-and-white sitcoms played endlessly on late-night channels: Leave It to Beaver, The Bradbury House, Our Loving Lane. In those shows, laughter was predictable problems solved neatly in 30 minutes. The mothers never screamed. The fathers never raised their voices. Children were hugged, not hurt. Simon memorized entire episodes, mouthing the lines like prayers. In his mind, those families were real in a way his own had never been. If the world outside was chaos, then these fictional families were order perfection. By the time he aged out of the foster system, Simon had learned to hide his inner storm behind politeness and precision. He studied social work in college, a choice that seemed noble to others but was to Simon a way to stay close to the structure he longed for. He became a caseworker, moving through homes where children were at risk, evaluating parents, writing reports. And each time a family fractured under his watch, something inside him twisted tighter. The breaking point came with the Knight family, a father with a violent temper, 2 young children wide-eyed and silent. Simon recommended immediate removal, citing escalating danger. The court denied it, citing insufficient evidence. 2 months later, the entire Knight family was dead. Murder-suicide. Simon read the report at his desk under flickering fluorescent lights, his hands trembling. The system, he realized, would never save anyone. It was broken beyond repair. That night, alone in his apartment, Simon took out an old photograph of his mother and siblings. He smoothed the creases with careful fingers. Then he turned to the blank page of a new journal and began to write. If the real world refuses to create a perfect family, I will build one myself. Carefully, lovingly, perfectly. The words flowed like a vow. From that night forward, Simon Grant began to disappear. In his place, a new figure was born: Papa, the man who would never let anyone leave again. Above his desk, he tacked up a calendar. The first square he marked with a single word: Day 1. The storm rolled in before dawn, a gray curtain of snow sweeping across the fields and swallowing the horizon. Olivia Hayes stood at the edge of a rural road collar, turned up against the biting wind, her breath visible in the half-light. Behind her, squad cars idled their engines, humming headlights slicing through the white haze. They had found her. The call had come in only an hour earlier, a child wandering barefoot near an abandoned train depot on the outskirts of town. Olivia's chest had tightened as she listened, the words punching through her exhaustion like a blade. A child. Alone. Female. Maybe 9 or 10. Now, as she stepped inside the darkened depot, the world seemed to narrow to a single point. Emma Carter sat on the floor in a corner, her thin arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit with one ear barely attached. Her hospital gown was torn, her knees scraped raw. She did not look up when Olivia approached. The girl's eyes were fixed on something only she could see, a point far beyond the crumbling walls of the room. Olivia crouched slowly, careful not to startle her. She did not speak at first. She simply lowered herself to the child's level, letting Emma feel her presence steady and unthreatening. Minutes passed. A gust of wind rattled the broken windows and Emma flinched. Olivia reached out, palm up. Emma's gaze shifted tentative and then her small hand crept forward, settling in Olivia's. It was ice cold, fragile as porcelain. Olivia wrapped it gently, fighting the urge to pull the child into her arms. Too much, too soon would shatter this delicate moment. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was flat, mechanical, as though reciting lines from a play. "Papa said we have to be ready by Sunday. Sunday is family day." The words sent a chill through Olivia that had nothing to do with the cold. She leaned closer, listening as Emma continued in halting fragments. Breakfast at 7, hair brushed, sweaters clean, smiles perfect. Papa takes our picture. If you don't smile right, you go to reflection time. Olivia's throat tightened. Reflection time. Clara had mentioned it too, her voice breaking. Now Emma gave it shape. Papa says reflection time makes you better. You sit at the table and he talks about what you did wrong. Then the shot comes. It makes you sleepy. When you wake up, you don't remember the bad things anymore. Emma blinked rapidly as if trying to recall something buried beneath layers of fog. Sometimes. People forget too much. Then they don't come back. Olivia forced herself to stay calm, though her pulse pounded in her ears. She had been a detective long enough to recognize conditioning manipulation, the systematic breaking of a mind. Emma wasn't just describing punishment. She was describing erasure. The rabbit slipped from Emma's hands and fell to the floor. Olivia picked it up, brushing off the dust, and returned it to her. A small, fragile connection formed in that simple gesture. Emma's next words came in a whisper so soft Olivia had to lean in to hear. "He says, when we're perfect, no one will ever leave again." The sentence struck Olivia like a hammer. She saw flashes of her own past, her daughter's empty bedroom, the hollow ache of not knowing. For a moment, she was no longer Detective Hayes, but simply a mother staring at another mother's stolen child. She swallowed hard and rose to her feet. Time was slipping through her fingers like sand. Outside the depot, she briefed the waiting officers. "He's planning something," she said, voice low but urgent. "Sunday is family day. That's less than 48 hours from now. We don't have time to wait for warrants or red tape. If we don't find him before then, these people will disappear forever." The team sprang into motion. Search patterns were established, databases cross-referenced. Olivia pinned a large map to the wall of the makeshift command center. She marked the locations of each disappearance with red dots. Patterns emerged slowly like a photograph developing in a dark room. Thomas Brooks taken outside a factory in January. Evelyn Harper vanished from her small farmhouse the following spring. Ryan Turner last seen walking home from school. Clara Mitchell gone after a parent-teacher conference. And now, Emma. The distances were too wide, the timelines too scattered to suggest a single man working on impulse. This was deliberate, planned with precision. Olivia circled each dot, connecting them with faint pencil lines. The lines converged on a single point, a stretch of rural land near the railway, isolated and easily overlooked. Then she remembered Clara's fragmented description. White house, blue shutters, a split oak tree behind it. The sound of trains every morning. Her gaze moved to Emma, who was now seated beside a heater, hands outstretched to the warmth. Olivia knelt beside her once more. "Emma," she said gently, "can you draw the house for me?" The girl hesitated, then accepted a sheet of paper and a crayon. Slowly, with halting strokes, she sketched a 2-story farmhouse, windows like watching eyes, the outline of a porch. Behind it, the tree split down the center like a wound. Finally, she drew a square at the edge of the house. "That's the basement door," Emma murmured. "We weren't supposed to see it, but I did when he took Caroline away." Olivia's breath caught. Caroline. Another name. Another victim who had never returned. Emma added rail tracks in the distance, two parallel lines that seemed to stretch endlessly into nowhere. The drawing was crude, but it was enough. Olivia snapped a photo with her phone and sent it to the tech team. Filter properties sold in the last 5 years. Look for a white house with blue shutters near an active rail line. Include basements in the search criteria. As the team worked, Olivia studied Emma. The girl's eyes were clearer now, but still haunted. The effects of the drugs would linger perhaps forever. The countdown had begun. Hours passed in a blur of data and desperation. At last, an officer approached with a printout. "We've got 3 possible matches," he said. Olivia scanned the list, her finger stopping at one address, Miller Road, purchased in cash by a man with no digital footprint. She knew in her bones this was it. "We move at dawn," she told the team, quietly. "No lights, no sirens. We go in clean and fast. He cannot know we're coming." As the briefing ended, Olivia returned to Emma's side. The girl was dozing, her rabbit clutched tightly against her chest. Clara's words echoed in Olivia's mind. 5 of us. Always 5. Somewhere out there, 3 captives still waited. Somewhere out there, Simon Grant Papa was preparing his final family day. Olivia looked out the window at the swirling snow. She had less than 48 hours to stop him. For those listening, the narrator's voice whispered like a shadow, "Subscribe and stay with us. The clock is ticking, and every second brings us closer to a truth too dark to face." The storm howled louder, rattling the glass. Time was running out. The convoy moved like a whisper through the falling snow. 5 unmarked vehicles glided down the narrow back road, their headlights' dimmed tires crunching softly over frozen gravel. The landscape around them was desolate and still, the kind of rural emptiness where sound traveled for miles and shadows seemed to breathe. In the lead vehicle, Detective Olivia Hayes sat tense and silent, her fingers tightening around the edge of the map spread across her lap. They were less than half a mile from the target. Beside her, Ben Knox, her second-in-command, checked the tactical feed from the thermal drone hovering overhead. His voice was low, almost a whisper. 3 heat signatures. All in the basement level. No movement upstairs. Olivia's stomach clenched. 3 captives, she thought. Thomas, Ryan, Evelyn. The missing pieces of Clara's family. But no sign of Simon Grant. The farmhouse came into view like a ghost emerging from the storm. It was exactly as Clara and Emma had described, white paint peeling, blue shutters clinging to warped frames, the split oak tree standing sentinel behind it. Snow clung to the branches like ash. For a moment, Olivia felt a flicker of unease. The house looked ordinary, even pitiful, as though it couldn't possibly contain the horrors they'd been chasing. But she knew better. Evil rarely looked extraordinary. She gave the signal. The convoy stopped, engines cut. Silence rushed in, vast and oppressive. 2 teams moved into position, one approaching the house from the rear kitchen door, the other circling to the concealed trapdoor identified by ground-penetrating radar. Olivia led the rear unit herself. Her breath fogged the air as she crouched low, snow biting at her exposed skin. The final approach was agonizingly slow. Every step seemed to echo through. She knew it was only her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. At the porch, she paused, listening. No voices, no footsteps, only the distant wail of a passing train. "Go," she mouthed. The breach was silent and swift. A flash of motion, the soft thud of boots crossing the threshold. The kitchen smelled of mildew and burnt sugar. The table was set for 5 plates arranged with precise care, a pot of oatmeal congealing on the stove. On the counter lay an open book. Olivia's eyes flicked over the title, How to Raise the Perfect Child. The sight sent a chill down her spine. She moved toward the living room where the walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, each dated and labeled. Family Day 112. Family Day 187. The poses were identical. Only the faces changed over time, as if roles were being recast. The illusion of happiness was complete and utterly hollow. Olivia forced herself to look away. There would be time for horror later. Now there was work to do. At the far wall, a bookshelf stood slightly askew. Emma had described a hidden passage behind it, and Olivia found the latch quickly. The shelf swung open with a low groan, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that rushed up was damp and metallic, carrying the unmistakable smell of fear. Basement access confirmed. Olivia murmured into her radio. Team 2, move. Below, the second unit was already in position at the trapdoor entrance. Ben's voice crackled in her earpiece. We breach in 3, 2, 1. The trapdoor splintered under their combined force. A gust of fetid air burst upward as they dropped into the lower corridor, weapons raised. The space was a nightmare of concrete and shadows. Dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sickly pools of light along the narrow hall. At the far end were 3 small rooms, each barred with reinforced doors. Olivia's team descended the staircase as shouts rang out. Clear, move, move. Inside the first cell they found, Thomas Brooks sprawled on a cot, his wrists bound, his skin gray and clammy. His eyes fluttered open, dazed and disbelieving. It's okay, an officer whispered, cutting his restraints. You're safe now. In the second cell, Ryan Turner huddled in a corner, rocking silently. It took 2 officers to coax him out. Their voices gentle, their movements slow. Evelyn Harper lay in the third cell, barely conscious, her breathing shallow. Olivia knelt beside her, pressing 2 fingers to the woman's fragile neck. A pulse, faint, but there. Relief surged through her like a flood. The extraction began. Paramedics rushed in with stretchers and blankets. The air filled with the sounds of hurried rescue, clipped commands, the hiss of oxygen tanks, the low murmur of reassurance. And then Olivia saw it. Iti. At the end of the hall was another door different from the rest. Not a cell, but a room. She approached cautiously, hand on her weapon, and pushed it open. What lay inside stole her breath. The walls were covered in photographs far more than upstairs. But these were different, raw, unedited, capturing moments of terror. Behind each photo was a note written in precise handwriting. Too weak. Replace. Good posture. Poor smile. In the center of the room stood a single bed, perfectly made. Beside it sat a small cassette recorder, still spinning. Olivia pressed stop, then rewind. The tape clicked softly before playing a man's voice. Day 201. Clara is unstable. I believe she still dreams of the outside world. I may need to begin scouting for a new mother. The girl remains my favorite. She understands what it means to be chosen. The words were calm, almost tender. Olivia's hands trembled as she clicked the recorder off. Ben appeared behind her, his face grim. Detective. He's not here. Olivia spun toward him. What do you mean? The tunnel goes deeper. We found fresh footprints leading into the woods. Less than an hour old. Realization hit Olivia like ice water. He knew. He had anticipated them. This rescue was not a victory. It was a distraction. Upstairs, an officer called out that the perimeter was secure. Snow fell heavily now, erasing tracks, burying evidence. Olivia looked at the freed captives, the photographs, the bed at the center of it all. Somewhere in the darkness beyond these walls, Simon Grant was already moving, and Family Day was still coming. For those listening, the narrator's voice whispered, "Subscribe and stay with us. The first battle may be over, but the war has only just begun." The snow had stopped by dawn, leaving behind a pale, muffled world. The farmhouse on Miller Road was silent now, its windows dark, its doors broken open like wounds that could never be closed. Smoke rose from the chimneys of nearby houses, ordinary homes waking to ordinary mornings, unaware of the nightmare that had been unearthed in their midst. At the edge of the property, a row of ambulances idled with doors wide open, their interiors lit with harsh white light. Medics moved quickly, voices clipped but steady, carrying stretchers across the snow. The cold seemed to seep into everything. The metal of the gurneys, the skin of the survivors, the bones of the rescuers. Thomas Brooks was the first to be lifted into an ambulance. His face was hollow, his lips cracked, his eyes staring at something only he could see. He did not speak, not even when a medic gently touched his shoulder and told him he was safe. His silence felt heavier than any words could have been. Ryan Turner followed his small body curled inward as if protecting some fragile piece of himself. He clung to the sleeve of the officer walking beside him, fingers digging in with desperate strength. Olivia Hayes watched as they loaded him into the vehicle, her throat tightening. She wanted to say something, anything. But there were no words that could reach him now. Evelyn Harper was last. The elderly woman's breaths came in shallow, uneven gasps, her skin paper-thin beneath the oxygen mask. A medic murmured a prayer under his breath as they wheeled her away. When the ambulances finally pulled out, their sirens muted at Olivia's request, the property fell eerily still. Only the sound of wind moving through the split oak tree remained. At Montgomery Memorial Hospital, a different kind of battle began. The survivors were placed in separate rooms, each carefully monitored by a team of doctors, nurses, and trauma specialists. Physical wounds could be measured and treated, dehydration corrected with IV fluids, puncture marks cleaned and bandaged, sedatives flushed from their systems. The other wounds, the ones that lived deep inside, were far more difficult. Clara Mitchell sat by a window in her room, watching snowflakes drift past the glass. Her hands rested in her lap, pale and trembling. Though she had been free for more than a day, part of her mind was still in the basement, counting the hours by the sound of trains. Dr. Elizabeth Wright, head of the hospital's trauma unit, sat quietly beside her. She did not press Clara to speak. Instead, she simply waited, offering the kind of steady presence that might one day feel safe. Finally, Clara's voice emerged fragile but clear. "I don't know who I am without him telling me." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Wright placed a hand gently over Clara's, anchoring her to the here and now. In another room, Ryan sat on his bed surrounded by crayons and paper. At first he would not touch them. Then slowly he began to draw. His first picture was of a house, a small square with a tree beside it split down the center. When he finished, he turned the page and drew another house. This one with windows lit up, smoke curling from a chimney, a family of stick figures standing outside. The two drawings side by side told a story Ryan could not yet speak. Thomas remained silent, staring at the ceiling, while Evelyn drifted between past and present, sometimes calling for Papa, other times murmuring the names of her real grandchildren. Olivia stood in the observation hallway, watching through the glass. These people were alive, yes, but survival was only the beginning. What Simon Grant had done to them went beyond captivity. He had rewritten their sense of self, stripped away their identities, replaced them with roles in his twisted play. She turned away, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. The victory they had achieved last night felt hollow. They had saved lives, but Simon was still out there, and he was planning something. Ben Knox appeared beside her, holding a folder thick with reports. His expression was grim. Footprints vanished less than a mile into the woods, he said. Snow covered the rest. It's like he disappeared into thin air. Olivia clenched her jaw. He didn't disappear. He's watching, waiting. Ben hesitated, then added forensics found something else in the basement. He handed her a small evidence bag containing a piece of paper torn from a notebook. On it were 3 words written in precise handwriting. Day 1. Soon. The message was clear. Simon wasn't finished. 2. Later, Olivia walked the hospital corridors alone. She paused outside Clara's room, listening to the quiet hum of machines, the soft rhythm of breath. Then she moved on past Ryan's drawings, past Evelyn's half-remembered prayers. She had promised herself she would not let this case consume her like the last one had. But as she stood at the window staring out at the frozen world beyond, Olivia knew there was no choice. Somewhere out there, Simon was building again. And next time, he wouldn't make the mistake of leaving survivors behind. The sun had barely risen when Olivia Hayes arrived at the Chester County Sheriff's Department. The world outside was washed in pale light, deceptively calm. Inside, the station buzzed with quiet urgency. Officers hunched over desks, phones rang in clipped bursts, and the air smelled of burnt coffee and adrenaline. Olivia's eyes burned from lack of sleep, but her mind was sharp, wired by the memory of Simon's note, day 1. Soon. Those 3 words gnawed at her, proof that what happened at Miller Road was only the first act in a far larger nightmare. Ben Knox met her in the briefing room, a grim set to his jaw. Spread across the table were files, photographs, and maps connected by strands of red string. It looked less like an investigation and more like the web of a spider. "You need to see this," Ben said quietly. He slid a folder toward her. Inside were surveillance photos taken months before Clara's escape, images of people in public spaces, children at playgrounds, women shopping for groceries, elderly couples sitting on park benches. All were marked with notes in Simon's precise handwriting. Mother, option B son. Promising smile, grandmother, replaceable. Olivia's stomach churned. He was scouting them, auditioning like actors for a play. Ben shook his head. "That's what we thought at first. But look closer." Olivia leaned in. In several photos, a dark figure appeared at the edge of the frame, a man taller than Simon, wearing a hooded coat. In one shot, his face was partially visible, revealing a crescent-shaped birthmark beneath his jaw. Her pulse quickened. "That's not Simon," No Ben confirmed. Facial recognition came back negative. This guy doesn't exist in any database, which means Simon isn't working alone. The realization hit Olivia like a blow. Simon hadn't been a lone madman creating a fantasy for himself. He was part of something bigger, something organized. Ben pulled up a satellite image on his tablet. "See, this property records show Simon bought Miller Road in cash, no mortgage, no paper trail. But another purchase was made 3 months ago in Virginia. Same pattern, same setup?" Olivia stared at the screen. A cluster of cabins deep in the woods, far from any town. Simon was building a family there, she whispered. Or, her voice faltered, someone else is already doing it. The room seemed to grow colder. For those listening, the narrator intoned, "The darkness deepens." Subscribe and follow, for the truth is more twisted than anyone imagined. Olivia straightened, resolve hardening. Miller Road hadn't been the end. It was only the beginning, and the next act was already in motion. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and ice. The convoy crawled along the narrow dirt road, engines muted, lights off. Pines rose like towering sentinels on either side, their branches heavy with snow. Olivia Hayes sat in the lead vehicle, her hands locked around the grip of her weapon. This was it. Miller Road had been only the first act. This place, these cabins hidden deep in the Virginia wilderness, was where the story would either end or consume them all. Beside her, Ben Knox studied the satellite feed on his tablet. His face was pale in the dim glow of the screen. "Thermal imaging shows 2 buildings with heat signatures," he whispered. "Multiple figures moving inside. Too many for just Simon." Olivia's stomach turned. She had expected Simon alone, maybe one accomplice. This was something bigger. "We go silent," she said. "No sirens, no lights, in and out before they even know we're here." The team disembarked, boots sinking into snow. The air was sharp and brittle, every breath a white plume. The cabins loomed ahead, dark, and hunched, their windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. In the distance, a faint melody drifted through the trees. Old music, distorted and crackling, the kind Clara had once described. It made Olivia's skin crawl. They split into 2 units. Ben led one group toward the rear cabin, while Olivia advanced on the main structure. Her heart hammered as she signaled her team forward. Step by step, they crept closer, the snow muffling their approach. Through a cracked window, Olivia glimpsed movement, a woman in a blue sweater, hair neatly brushed, arranging plates on a table. Beside her, a boy sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes glassy. It was Miller Road all over again. Olivia swallowed hard and gave the signal. The breach was swift and precise. Doors burst inward. Shouts filled the air. "Police! Hands up. The room erupted into chaos. Two women screamed. A man lunged toward a hidden door, but Ben's team intercepted him. Olivia's gaze swept the room, always searching for Simon. Then she saw him, or thought she did. At the far end of the cabin, a figure emerged from the shadows. Same build, same dark cardigan, same calm, measured stance. Simon Grant. Olivia's voice cut through the clamor. It's over. The figure paused, then slowly turned. Olivia's breath caught. It wasn't Simon. The face was different, sharper, younger, and beneath the jaw, a crescent-shaped birthmark. The man smiled, a chillingly familiar expression. "You've been chasing a ghost," he said softly. Simon was never the only one. Before Olivia could react, he slammed a lever on the wall. A deep rumble shook the floor. Somewhere beneath them, machinery roared to life. Ben's voice shouted over the radio. "Secondary structure. They're moving captives through a tunnel." Olivia sprinted toward the noise, heart pounding. The floorboards vibrated beneath her boots as she and two officers descended a narrow staircase. The air grew colder, damper. At the bottom, a long corridor stretched ahead, lit by flickering bulbs. Figures moved in the distance. Adults and children, some struggling, others eerily compliant. Olivia shouted commands, her voice echoing through the tunnel. "Get them out!" Secure the perimeter. 1 by 101. Captives were pulled to safety. A little girl clung to Olivia's neck, sobbing soundlessly. The resemblance to Emma made Olivia's chest ache, but the man with the birthmark was gone. At the tunnel's far end, a steel door gaped open. Beyond it lay the night forest, vast and endless. Footprints led into the darkness, already filling with fresh snow. Olivia staggered to a halt, breath ragged. She raised her weapon, but there was nothing to aim at, only the echo of footsteps fading into the cold. Behind her, Ben caught up, panting. "He's gone!" Olivia didn't answer. She just stared into the trees, rage and dread twisting inside her. Back at the cabin, officers swept through the rooms. They found journals, photographs, videotapes, all evidence of a network, not just a single man's delusion. Notes detailed recruitment methods, psychological manipulation, even plans for multiple families across different states. Ben flipped through one journal, his face pale. This isn't one madman, it's a system, a blueprint. Olivia scanned the pages, bile rising in her throat. How many more families? He didn't answer. The silence was enough. Outside, captives huddled in blankets near the waiting ambulances. Snow fell gently, softening the edges of the nightmare. A young boy asked Olivia if it was Sunday, yet his voice trembling. She knelt beside him, forcing her own voice to remain steady. "No," she said softly. "Sunday is over. You're safe now." But, even as she spoke, she knew it was a lie. Later, Olivia stood at the edge of the clearing, the cabins behind her lit by floodlights. Ben approached quietly. "We'll track him, Olivia. We'll shut this whole thing down." Olivia's gaze stayed fixed on the dark line of the forest. "We're not chasing one man anymore. We're chasing an idea, and ideas don't die easily." Somewhere out there, the man with the crescent birthmark was already moving on to his next stage, his next family. Olivia whispered to herself, a promise more than a statement. This isn't over. For those listening, the narrator intoned, voice low and haunting, subscribe and stay with us. The family may be broken, but the story has just begun. The wind rose, carrying away the last traces of snow. In its wake, the silence felt like a warning.